we're actually going to work on this idea of peace so that, okay, think about what I'm going to say, so that when you understand peace, you understand the church. But for you now, when you think of peace, you don't think of the church. You think of your own inner peace. But that's not how the Bible thinks. So another critical area to correct. The problem of achieving peace, therefore, will involve us looking, as you can see in the headers, looking at mystery briefly, and also looking at the word remember, which I think I've already done enough for, actually. And also the idea of the Gentiles, because all of these words capture the idea of the hostility, which you see over here, okay, which affects this peace. Or shall we say is the opposite of this peace. Again, we always read that hostility as just conflict, but it's not just conflict, it's not even mainly conflict. By looking at all that, then we're going to be able to hopefully capture the idea of what it means to be separated from Christ. Separated from Christ. Okay, let's get into it. And you can see the rest of the headers and see where I'm going. All right, I also took me a good half an hour to try to work the levels of the headers out properly for you. I'm still not satisfied, but I think it's better than it was last night. So when you're using Word, don't forget to click your view, navigation. Kids, help mommy to do it now. Hey, don't laugh. Some of my apprentices didn't know how to do this, okay? And I'm like 30 years older than them. So in your click view, click your view at the top of your menu bar or navigation bar, click view, go to the navigation. There's a field checkbox you can click. Then out will pop along the side of your, this is like studying, yeah. Hi, newcomer. On the left side, you have all these header levels. And in there, you can see the different levels I've assigned to the point. That way you don't get lost. A sub-point is a sub-point, not the main point. It contributes to the main point. Okay, just another quick tip for you in case, can you please help each other? Because I don't want to keep saying this in the middle of get it or something. All right, so the problem of achieving peace. Now, everything we've said, the neglect that we would show as Christians generally, I think probably we're all on average, somewhat guilty of this kind of thing. That would be a real tragedy, a concern for you individually and corporately, since the things that we've already shown here in the structure point to the fact that Paul is covering material here that has a very central place in biblical revelation. Obviously, in today's world, as in the time of Jesus and long before that, this coverage of peace was of immense interest because peace is a problem that human beings have always faced. We know the theological answer to that, right? In the end, as many theologians will point out, when we have conflict vertically with God, when we are not at peace with God, we are not reconciled with God, it will show up horizontally. And in terms of reading the Gospels, we see that in terms of not only so-called conflict or problems in relationships with people, but in terms of the Ds, the 4 Ds, right? Demons, death, disease, and disease, and disaster. These 4 Ds are really part of the chaos, the hostility, which 1 verse 10 is going to have to reverse, where all things come and are reconciled, as Colossians puts it, under the Christ. So peace is not just a concept that belongs to Christians. We should never think of peace as some kind of esoteric, personal, individualized, very spiritualized Christian attribute. So we don't evangelize people with this peace. We think we evangelize them with the cross, which brings forgiveness. Peace is a byproduct. That's complete nonsense when you think of Isaiah 52, where the messenger there preaches peace, or God preaches peace, or the servant achieves peace in 52 and 53 in Isaiah. So obviously, it's not only of a massive concern, especially in a world which has the current Israel-Palestine conflict, not to mention the fact that South China Morning Post has talked about the possibility of war in our region. You know that the South China Sea is being claimed by China because for them, the whole line of islands is the borderline for where they want their country's sea zone to be demarcated. So it's possible. And even in the last 100 years, we had a Korean War on the Korean Peninsula. My family was directly affected by it. So you see, war is a constant reality. And the shocking thing is that as Christians, We don't seem to have the answer for that. In fact, we go to the other opposite. We then look at peace as I said just now, a personal, individual virtue or property, an emotion that comes as a byproduct of feeling and knowing God and how much He loves you. So that peace is really just an emotion of satisfaction and calmness. You know, auntie, you should go to church. When you sing the songs and then you hear how the pastor says, God loves you, you'll feel peace and less anxious. Well, not in this church. In CRC, you'll be disturbed. Where's the navigation bar? If you're even there, hi, are you still here, auntie? I don't know who you are, but I love you and I'm actually trying to help you right now. Instead of actually preaching this peace, which will solve the biggest problems and deal the toughest issues, ultimately, in knowing God and what kind of peace He brings in His Son. You see, He is our peace, as you see in verse 14. We turn into this inward-looking peace, and we turn peace into a very weak idea. Whereas when we look at the Bible, we see it's tied directly, in fact, to the access to God and to the fulfillment of His mystery. As I said just now, looking at it structurally, but in terms of this topic already, with some justification, scholars have viewed this entire passage today that we're looking at in 2:11 to 22 as the crown jewel of Ephesians. Those are not my words. Those are their words. They look at 11:22, and thank God for scholars, even if they don't agree with them always, and if you don't really like their personal beliefs. Some of them are obviously not believers in Jesus Christ, but they can read the text pretty well. So shame on us for Korean Christians and not being able to see that. They can see. A liberal scholar can see. You might say a non-Christian scholar can see that structurally, following the text and its arguments, this is the crown jewel. That this topic of peace, that this concern for peace, this achievement of God's fulfilled gospel in peace, this making peace, so important here. I had a hard time deciding whether to put it here or to the left. This making peace in this one new man. I should draw that properly. See how this one new man is related to this making peace, so therefore it's about the church. This church itself is the proclamation. You didn't have it on while I was doing all that, so maybe you missed it. I got to repeat all of it again, the animation. Okay, let's go again. Hostility, I circled that already. So this making peace, then this one new man, which is described as making peace. This one new man, which is the church, means that on view here, I'm not going to quite do it as well as I did just now, but on view here is this creation of the church that is making peace. When was the last time you thought of CRC as a proclamation of peace? In your mind, no, man. In Klang Valley, you think we create conflict. Well, there's something Jesus was to say about that. But in the fact that Jesus is our peace, verse 14, and the fact that in Him one new man is created, and that this creation, new man, is making peace. You see what I'm underlining? I suppose I should highlight now. And the fact that it all comes down into the church, you have the argument that to preach the gospel is to preach the peace that the church is the display of. By the way, that means, GGs, you better work out what that looks like in your relationships. That means, church, in terms of your budget, you better spend on peace. And if I find you spending on supporting the Palestinian or Israelites, or some Jakarta lobby or something like that, I think you're going to read this text again. Do you understand what I'm saying? So this is an integral part of you being a display of God's glorious work in you. The gospel of 2 verse 7 to verse 10. Don't need to underline, can you can follow. Can This is a critical part of this 2 verse 7 to verse 10 achievement. Peace. So the problem of achieving peace is not so much on God's part. He done it. The problem is us, in our thinking, in our failure to understand all this, such that we don't recognize, even if liberal scholars, that this is the crown jewel